following along with the music this morning, you're going to notice that a number of the themes we're going to touch on in the message. And as we come to the communion table this morning, we're wound into the songs that we sang. The power of the blood we celebrate this morning. We remember the shedding of Christ's blood for us. We're going to be talking about being successful in the new year, which is likely going to mean some change in your life and in my life. The idea of humility, which is a key component, as we're going to see, in this pathway. So let me invite you to take out the message guide this morning that's in your program, and you can follow along in that way. And also invite you to turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18. If you're using a Pew Bible, it's 867. 867, and you can follow along in that way if you would like also. So this morning we're going to be talking about success. We're going to be talking about success and being a winner, accomplishing great things in the year ahead. And so we're going to kind of unpack that a little bit this morning. Lloyd Corey wrote an article a number of years ago in a magazine called Executive Digest, and in that particular article, he said this. He said, the trouble with success is that the formula is the same for the one as the one for a nervous breakdown. Success isn't easy. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of concentration. It takes a lot of effort. And it can be consuming. And so that, and that's just the thought of just being successful in terms of the world. What about being successful in terms of spiritual things? And so we want to unpack that this morning. Matthew 18, the passage of Scripture, contains an account here with regard to the disciples arguing about whose car alarm that is that's going off. It's a black Jeep. And so your car is now making its way from the parking lot to someone else's. But in Matthew chapter 18, the disciples are going back and forth about who should hold the seat as the greatest, as the highest disciple, these high seats in the kingdom. And there's a number of times that particular conflict rose for the disciples throughout the Gospels we see. Their desire was for recognition, their desire was for earthly kingdom, that kind of thing. If you would, they were looking for success. They were looking to take the next step. They were looking for the corner office. They were looking to be the winner. In Matthew chapter 18 and verse 1, this is what we read. It says, at that time the disciples came to Jesus saying, who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And there's really two assumptions when we start Matthew 18 from this place here. Behind the questions that the disciples ask, if you want to analyze this, and the first is that a person is great if you're in the kingdom. That if you're in the kingdom, you're great. And the second is that there are degrees of greatness. Who will be the greatest in the kingdom? Now, Jesus really doesn't say anything about these two issues, although, in many senses, he taught both. That a person who is in the kingdom is great. Everything and everyone in heaven, in the kingdom of God, is great, is wonderful. Even if you would, perfected. And the second idea here is a person can even be greatest, as we're going to see in these verses. But the question that I want to unpack with you this morning as we talk about success is, well, how does that happen? How does somebody take that step? How does somebody go and live successfully in God's kingdom? And if you look at the disciples, one of the things that you're going to notice is we're not talking greatness here as they're looking at it. We're not talking greatness in terms of quality or character. We're talking in terms of prestige, position. They're thinking of power and wealth and earth stuff, and Jesus here is going to talk with them about something different, about the kingdom of heaven and kingdomly values, if you would. And we shouldn't think ill of the disciples. We shouldn't, they had reason to be concerned about the whole issue that they were. Jesus had made it clear by now that his kingdom was a different kind of kingdom. So they knew that. Jesus had also honored 3 of them in a special way. Do you remember he took 3 of them up onto the Mount of Transfiguration and they were honored in that special way, Peter, James, and John. We also know Peter was honored in a special way. Peter, you are the rock. And so there was an honor, there was recognition that was happening. And there had also been discussion amongst themselves in terms of who was the greatest and who would be the greatest on the heels of Jesus' death in Mark chapter 9. And so success is on their mind. And one of the things that we want to think about as we head into the new year is success and how to be better at being a follower of Christ. And if we're going to look at Matthew 18 and take our lead from the disciples and from Jesus here, this is what I want us to see this morning as our transforming truth. And spiritual success does not come from an educated head, but a re-educated heart. That success for you and for me as believers is not going to come because we know a whole lot. It's going to come because we have a re-educated heart. Our heart is looking at different things. And so Jesus, think about his relationship with the disciples. Jesus was often having to re-educate the disciples. He was often having to, if you would, change their thinking from one way to another, to point out something that they hadn't thought about before, or that perhaps they had been thinking one way for years and years and years, and all of a sudden Jesus had to shift gears on them and say, well, that's not really the way it is. People struggle with this all the time, the issue of recognition and position and prestige, esteem. But Jesus here is pointing out something different to them. And so this re-education process happens here in Matthew 18, and I want to point out 3 things to you that I think are critical in terms of a pathway or a path to success in the new year. 3 principles, if you would, for your spiritual life in the coming year that I think will help you take the next step spiritually if you work through them. And the first is this: it's the path of a humble spirit. The path of a humble spirit. We did sing about humility, didn't we, in the last song? The issue of humility. Jesus begins the chapter by turning the focus of the disciples to this child. A child that is there amongst them. And Jesus uses what is at hand often to teach great lessons to those that are there with him. And in this particular case, there is a child that is joining them, that is there amongst the crowd. And he draws the child out in verse 2 and says this, 2 and 3. Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the midst of them, and said, assuredly I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. And so a humble spirit requires really this 2-step work. Become like a little child and humble yourself. There's first, I want to suggest, a change required. A change. Unless you are converted, he uses the word. The word for change actually is the word conversion. It's the word straphete. It means to turn. It means to turn around. It means to go another way. It means to turn from one thing to another thing. And so Jesus says, in order for you to do this, unless you are converted, unless you turn from one thing to this other thing, unless you turn around, you can't enter the kingdom. You cannot be successful. You cannot. The disciples needed to turn from the sins that are so common in the lives of people, and in this case, in this particular unique context, it's the issues of pride, it's the issue of prestige, it's the issue of having position, ambition, worldliness. Conversion determines a person's spiritual destiny. Whether we turn from our fleshliness and we turn from our brokenness and we turn from our sinfulness and we turn to what Christ did and we are converted, our hearts are changed. Scripture says that we are born again in that conversion, that we now are no longer separated from God, but we are now in relationship with our Heavenly Father once again. But it's not only a spiritual conversion, but there is also a process of conversion that happens, and we call that sanctification, that we turn day by day, not just once, but day by day, from those things that are old and the things that are fleshly, the old man, and we turn to the new man. And so if we want to be successful, we need to begin this change. There needs to be this conversion in us. When Christ called and made the child the example, he demonstrated what he meant. And first was this. Here in this little child, he needed to have an act of trust. An act of trust. Oh, or surrender. That's okay. An act of surrender. He gave up what he was doing. Now, at that moment, we don't know if he was just doodling in the sand or he was, we have no idea what this kid was doing. But we know that he set that aside, surrendered that to come and to be a part. Jesus took him from where he wasn't put him in the midst. There was surrender in that. Second thing we see is that there was an act of humility on the part of the child. There was an act of humility. You ever know a kid that always wanted to be the center of the show? You know that kid? He's always doing something or whatever, and it's like, the spotlight's got to be on him before there can't be a spotlight. Humility. But here, this child wasn't trying to get him. He wasn't pushing his way in. Jesus brought him in. There was a change there. Many times children, I think, are afraid of adult situations. They're a little uneasy. They're not sure how to respond. They're not sure how to interact with adults. It's a great thing as a parent to teach your kid and to work with them on how to interact and to speak with and to engage adults appropriately and respectfully. An act of humility, he's brought in. He doesn't push forward, he's called in. We also see this, another important, an act of obedience. He listened to Jesus. Humility involves a change of who we're willing to listen to. He did exactly what Jesus asked him to do. He didn't say, I'm out of here. And there was obedience. There was obedience. So we have surrender, we have obedience, we have humility, and we have trust. He trusted Jesus. He trusted Jesus in the midst of that situation. There was an act of trust. He sensed an openness. He responded to the call. Conversion, change. Over in Acts chapter 3, this is what it says. Repent therefore and be converted, be changed, that your sins may be blotted out, so that times of refreshing may come from the presence of the Lord. And so if you want to be successful in this coming year, it requires a path of humility, and that humility requires change, and it will bring refreshing to your life. Not only change, conversion, but also there's a becoming. We become like this humble child. We become. It's always considered one of the most insignificant, if you would, qualities, but it determines so much. Whoever humbles himself, Matthew 18, verse 4, as this little child is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Greatest. I was reading one person's message with regard to this particular passage and used this illustration, which I thought was pretty interesting as a pastor. So the church that this pastor was at decided that they were going to honor him. And the honor they were going to bestow upon the pastor was the most humble pastor in America. The most humble pastor in America. And so they went in and honored him. They gave him a little, they gave him a little medal, kind of thing, and this, and the next Sunday, here he is. And so he decides he's going to wear the medal. He's going to wear the medal because the church gave it to him. And they had honored him in this way. And it was on that Sunday that they took it away because he was no longer humble. How do you become humble? Sometimes humility isn't easy. It isn't easy to become humble because sometimes humility is viewed as weakness. Guys, it's particularly hard for us to be humble because humility can be viewed as a weakness. It can be viewed as cowardice. It can be viewed, if I choose to be humble, I'm not going to get anywhere. I gotta fight my way to the top. I'm going to get passed over if I choose to be humble. But here in this particular case, the humility led to Christ, and in this particular case, let me tell you, in terms of being successful this year, humility is for the win. The path to success requires humility, a change, a conversion of who we are so that we might become something different. Over in Philippians chapter 2, Paul says this, he says, "Let nothing be done out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others." What an incredible picture of what God desires for us in terms of humility. The second is not only the path of humility, but I want to suggest this, it's a path of the unoffending life. The unoffending life. You say, well, what in the world does that mean? And so here, the child represents Christ, and it represents any beginner in the faith. It represents anyone with childlike faith. And in the midst of Matthew 18 here, as he unpacks this, he talks about the importance of having an unoffending life. And he gives what I'm going to call a strong warning in that next verse, in verse 6. A strong warning, a very upfront warning. He says this, "Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea." Right? Leading a child astray is an incredibly tragic, and if you would, it's the worst of sins. Nothing worse than leading someone to sin. It's one thing when you do it, but when you do it and you lead someone else, or you just purposely lead someone else in that direction. And so Jesus communicates this severity to the disciples. Let's unpack this a little bit here. Verse 6, let's look at some things. He says it would be better to put a millstone around your neck and cast you into the depths. And there were a couple of different types of millstones that were used in Jesus' day. You couldn't just go and, if you would, buy a bag of flour or whatever. And so women would have a millstone. They would have one that they would use themselves, and they would take the grain and they would mill it to make, bread or whatever. But Jesus is not talking that kind of millstone here. He's talking a very unique kind of millstone. He's talking about the kind of millstone that's called a mulas. It's used by the oxen to grind the grain. It's the large one that if you would, the oxen pulls around and it grinds it, and it's big. Sometimes, have you ever noticed people who have what looks like a millstone in their front yard or something like that? It's round with a hole in the center, kind of thing, and they use it as a decorative piece. We're talking something of that nature. Trust me, if one of those was dangled on my neck and I was cast into the sea, I'm feeding the fish. Because I'm not coming back. I'm not coming back. Jesus said it would be better for someone who offends or causes a child to stumble to have one of those boys tied around his neck and to be cast into the sea. He says that's how serious this is. And he goes on here, and he's talking about really when this happens, when I go down to the depths of the sea and that's on my neck, what's happening to me? I'm drowning. I'm gurgling. I'm not. Drowning in Jesus' day was one of the worst ways to die. It was used as a form of punishment by the Romans, and the reason that they used it as punishment, and the Jews hated it so much, it was only for the worst offenders. It was a terrible way to die. And for a Jew, third, as we unpack this method did not allow for you to be buried. which is an important part of Jewish culture. So the warning here is strong about not leading other people astray, not having an offending life. Why is it? Well, how do we do that? Well, sometimes we do that by our example. Sometimes we set an example that is not appropriate, and so therefore it leads people astray. We need to be careful of the example that we set for other people. The things that we do, sometimes it can be the places that we go. I mean, there's nothing wrong with going there, but it sets a bad example. An example issue. Sometimes it's by actually leading people there. It's not only what they see you do, but it's what you do with them, and you take them with you. Sometimes we lead people astray by passing over a sin, by seeing a sin and doing nothing. In that case, if you would, it would be better to be offending. Because by not addressing that particular issue, you're allowing that to continue. Another way to lead astray, have you ever poked fun at someone for doing the right thing? Have you ever poked fun at someone for doing the right thing? You know, and they do it, and it is the right thing. Perhaps, you know, you find something, and you're like, this isn't mine, someone's looking for this, and, you know, what do you do with it? You know, here I take it to the closest responsible person for where I am at, and I say, someone's going to be looking for this. Or I post, have you ever seen these things? I found this ring. Does anybody know whose ring this is? You know, tell me what it says inside, or whatever. My father worked, before he passed away, he was working at a private school, a prep school in New Jersey, and the kids there had more money than sense. They really just were just ridiculous about things. They would go to the campus store, they would buy clothing in the morning because the building was chilly. By about 11 o'clock, they would take off the clothes, throw it on the floor in the hallway, and just leave it. You know, we're talking ridiculously crazy kids. And so for a number of years, we dressed in what we called Pingree fashions, which was discarded sweatshirts and all kinds of clothing from all kinds of. But, I mean, there would be people would come, and my dad was, you know, over the buildings and grounds of the school, and so they would find cameras. My very first laptop was a discard from the school that nobody would claim. But my dad went and would put it in the lost and found, and if it sat there, they had a time limit. If it wasn't claimed, then cameras, our first digital cameras, all kinds of stuff, crazy stuff. But sometimes, you know, it was like, you know, just bring it home. You know, don't poke fun at people for doing what's right. Because sometimes it leads them astray. It leads them astray. But secondly, let me suggest not only is there a strong warning, but there is also what I'm going to call a recognition of the world's involvement. In verse 7 it says this, it says, woe to the world because of offenses. So Jesus here recognizes that the world as a whole is involved in this, living this kind of life and leading people astray. For offenses must come, but woe to the man by whom the offense comes. The world is sinful. We live in a sinful world. We acknowledge that. We see that each day. You know, and no one is going to walk in the world and not face temptation and testing. But you shouldn't be the one to provide that. You as a Christian, you should be different. As a believer, you should be living differently. Over in John chapter 5, it says this, we know that we are of God, and the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. So the world is involved in this, living this life that pulls us away from success. But he says the pathway to success is to not be the offending person. To be careful what you do and where you lead people in the example. Be careful. But then, third, let me suggest this, that there's a way to proceed, and it's very clear. The cure is severe, just as the sin is severe. And so Jesus says this, if your hand causes you, or foot causes you to sin, cut it off. Cast it from you. It's better for you to enter into life lame or maimed rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into the lake of fire. He goes on, and if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out, cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life with 1 eye rather than having 2 to be cast into hellfire. Pretty interesting stuff here, isn't it? Jesus says what? Cut off your hand. He says cut off your foot. He says pluck out your eye. Remove it, take it away, pull it back, push it away. And now, understand, Jesus here is speaking figuratively. He's not promoting some form of extreme asceticism, if you would. He wouldn't want us damaging our temple, if you would, in devotion to the high priest. However, the escaping of punishment and spiritual purity is worth any price. He's saying, you know what? To take that next step, to be successful, it requires a great price. It's interesting here, in both cases when he breaks this out, he says it is better to be cast into hellfire. He also says to everlasting fire. That's a horrible death. Unimaginable. The severity of hell stresses again the severity of sin and the importance of being free from offense. I wonder if people were to look at your life and to kind of, if you would, cobble together your life, whether they would say this was an offending or an unoffending life. When we were away over between Christmas and New Year's, we were having a conversation, and I don't remember where it was, and it wasn't my wife. If you hear New Year's Eve, there was just a moment where I realized my wife had said something that I was sharing. It's like, oh, it's my wife. But we were having this conversation, and it was about Alfred Nobel of the Nobel Peace Prize. And one of the things that I had read was Alfred Nobel, actually, the impetus for him forming the prize was that his brother had passed away, and a newspaperman mistakenly had thought it was him. And so the obituary that went in the paper was the one for Alfred Nobel, not his brother. And so he had that unique experience of being able to see how people thought of him. Can you imagine being able to see what people think of you when you're dead while you're still alive? And it was all of a sudden that he realized no one saw him the way that he hoped they would see him. Nobel was famous for dynamite. He was famous as, if you would, a weapons maker. He was famous for being a dealer in death. And that's the way that people saw him. And he said, I don't want to be known that way. And so, using the wealth he had accumulated, he began and initiated the Nobel Peace Prize as a way to celebrate peace and not death. How do people see your life? How do people see you? What kind of legacy do you leave behind? What kind of impact do you have? The path to success in 2020 is going to involve some humility, but it's also going to involve us changing, if you would, and being mindful of the life that we live, because we should not be living we should not be living an offensive, but rather an unoffending life. Third, let me close with this. It requires the path of what I'm going to call a committed will. There needs to be a desire for this. And so Jesus, as he continues to share, he shares about his Father's, and what I'm going to say, the Father's wish. He states the Father's wish in verse 10, that we would be committed to this. He says, take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I say to you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. Don't despise a child. Don't despise a believer. Don't despise another person. What does that mean? What does it mean to despise? Well, it means to consider them unimportant. as if they have no contribution to make, as if they bring nothing to the table. The second thing that it means is it's don't do an unbecoming thing in front of them. Set a bad example which could be followed. Don't despise them. And so recognize their worth, but in recognizing their worth, don't lead them down the wrong path. It's interesting here, and I mean, there's talk from time to time about this whole issue of guardian angels and stuff like that. I don't understand. I don't have convictions with regard to that. I thought about that some, but it seems clear that in some way, shape, or form, there is a favored position for children in particular, especially his children, us, and that there seems to be some particular attention on them that angels are given with regard to children, and these angels have direct access to God who watch over them. We kind of can pull that out of Matthew 18, verse 10 here. Over in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14, it says this, "Are they not all ministering spirits set forth to minister for those who will inherit salvation?" That there is this angelic ministry for children and for us. And so God wants to preserve, wants to sustain us, his sheep. He wants us, there's a commitment here, but also this work is illustrated. It's also illustrated. And here we find the parable of the lost sheep. And it begins verse 11. It says, "For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountains to save the one that is straying? And if he should find it, surely I say to you, he rejoices more over that sheep than over 99 that did not go astray." He came to save the lost, and he sets aside the 99 to go after the one. If you were a shepherd, you mean that's crazy. You stick with what you've got, and the one that just won't stay there, that's okay. If I can have 99 at the end of the day, that one I would let go. But Jesus goes after the one. He takes care of the flock, makes sure they're secure, and goes after the one. The lost sheep consumes his thought, his passion, his energy, his effort. He's committed. And there's a commitment for us, a commitment that we need to make to being what God wants us to be. And there's a statement about his will. That's what I'm going to call it, his will. His desire is that not a single one would perish. Verse 14, "Even so, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that none of these, it is his will that none of these would perish." His desire is for the lost sheep to come to him, to embrace him, to come back to him into the fold. He's not slack. 2 Peter chapter 3. "The Lord is not slack concerning his promises, some count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that we all should come to repentance." So what is the path? 3 things I suggest. First, humility. Humility. The second is having a life that's unoffending. A life that is exemplary. A life that brings people closer to Christ as opposed to pushes them away and provides a good example. And then finally, a life that's committed. Our Heavenly Father was committed to the one sheep that was lost. Committed to those that were separated, those who had gone astray. There was a commitment there. What is our commitment? What is our commitment going to be? Our next step for the new year? So for you, maybe today is your day. I'm talking about New Year's resolutions. This morning on Facebook, when I talked about, hey, today's a great day, not just for a resolution, but a resolution for you to come to church. Start a new thing, come to church. For you, perhaps, it's just embracing Christ for the very first time. And we would love to see you do that and to start the new year in that way, with new life in Christ. In a few moments, we're going to remember that new life in Christ that's made available through what he did on the cross. But second, perhaps you've known Christ for a long time and you've walked for a long time, but if you reflect, hasn't been a whole lot of success. There's still some areas, perhaps, that are in need of fine-tuning and work. Will 2020 be your year of success? Not of prestige and not of power and not of stuff. But will it be your year where if God was to write your eulogy, your obituary, he would say something like, well done, good and faithful servant. Or he would say, you know what, it took a little while, but he really got it together. Or she tried my patience a little bit. But 2020 is a different kind of year for her. Maybe for the first time, maybe for another time. Let's commit ourselves to being successful. This year will have challenges, it will have celebrations. But God will walk with us through those things. And if we're committed and humble and mindful of how we live, particularly amongst others, that God's grace will be successful.